on with it. So first, the concept of homeostasis. So homeostasis is a term that comes from Greek. Many of our vocabulary have come from there, and is for same and steady, and refer to any process that living things are used to maintain conditions that they are stable for the survival. So the idea is, and this is applied in many domains, from thermoregulation, from nutrition, safety, and so on. So basically, the system is working in a very mechanic way, in a very simple way. So we have a set point that is a range of value in which we can navigate, fluctuate around. And when these values or this range is not fulfilled, so you are above or below this range, then there is a cascade of processes that they are initiated by the homeostatic system. So let's take the case of thermoregulation. So we have a temperature that is around 36 degrees in our body. Our skin has receptors that are called detector in the system, that they sense the temperature, and they send this information to a control center, in this case the hypothalamus, which estimate whether there is a deviation or not to this set point. If it's detecting a deviation from the set point, then it initiates a cascade of events via effectors to bring the system into its homeostatic state, into balance. So for example, if we are cold, if the temperature is below 36 degrees, then our skin starts to create goosebumps, the base constraint, and so on. While if the temperature of the body is going up, then there is a dilation of our vessel, we start to sweat to regulate the temperature. So as I say, they're very mechanic things. This concept that you can imagine is happening in many cases has been also applied recently to the social system. When I first thought about this, I heard a colleague say, well, social homeostasis, how you can talk about that? I mean, you don't really die of being not having social contact. While if you don't eat, then at a certain point, actually sooner than later, you will die. Maybe, but maybe not. This is the new field that we are trying to understand what is happening here. The idea is not new at all. Actually, if we go back in the past, the first person, or one of the first person that was studying the effect of alteration to the social system was Henry Harlow. So these scientists actually did a lot of experiments that nowadays they are will not allowed anymore. So they are ethically not admissible anymore, acceptable anymore. But he did it for a very actually good reason, because at the time, and this is around the 60s, the idea was that children, they don't need anything apart from food and a roof under the head, being warm, and that's about it. So they don't need to have the warmness of the contact of the mother. So the mother was only there for feeding them. So I think our generation, our parents, they grow up with this. My parents, maybe you're not, because will be my age probably. But basically, my parents grow up with this idea. And for him, it was like he had actually a different view. So he thought actually that is not the case, that human contact, there is something special about that. And without it, we are not able to survive. So what he did a series of experiments to understand the consequence of social isolation. And he did it in primates, non-human primates. So first set of experiments, just as I say, for historical reason, he divided, so he explored the behavior of monkeys that were taken away from their mothers 6 to 12 hours after birth, so very, very early. And then put the monkey in a condition in which she could receive food and warmed by a wild mother, so a surrogate mother that was covered by wire, or a surrogate mother that it was covered by wood, and water by clothes. Sorry. And what he observed is that when despite the food and the temperature was of the wild mother, the monkey was spending most of the time clinging to the clothed mother. So there was something about this fur and this intimate contact that seems to attract, to be particularly salient, biological for these primates. And he also saw in other experiments that by removing little animal like primates very early and deprived completely from social contact, it has severe consequence on the animal, to a point that they were irreversible. So this speaks that indeed there are evidence that social isolation or lack of contact and some deviation on this need as they have an influence, an impact on our health and well-being. And the question is this regulated as similar as to other homeostatic systems? So the concept of social homeostasis, as I said, is pretty new. So it's one proposed in 2019 by Matthew and Ty. So there are two researchers based in US. They do very, very nice animal research. And basically they suggest a very similar system as the one I presented before. So also for social contact and social need, we have a certain set point, and then we can discuss what is this set point. If there are deviation around this set point, they are tolerated, nothing happens. But when the deviation are above or below the threshold, then this is detected and the control center is sending to effector signal to do something, to bring the body or the homeostatic system that is now dysregulated to its balance. So it could look something like this. So what I propose is basically that not only social quantity, but also quality of the interaction. So it's become even more complex how the set point is defined. So as I said, the interaction, there is an optimal range in which the interaction, they change or play around this set point. There is a dynamic range. When this range is, when this set point is, there is a strong deviation for it, what had happened is detected, and then the system tries to bring the organism to the balance. But if this is not possible for some reason, for example, there is no possibility to get contact anymore. For example, when you're an old person and your close friends, they are not there anymore, then the time that you stay on this deviation is getting longer, the set point change, and then you will have a different and a new set point. If I make this example with food, I think it's even more clear. So in food, we have the same mechanism, or actually it's the same mechanism we can use here is the one for food. So we are used to have a certain amount of calories in our body, but if at a certain point we stop to eat or eat much less, at the beginning we'll be very hungry and we will have the feeling and the motivation to look for food. But at a certain point, if the food does not come in, the set point or where you get hungry changes, and then you start to eat less. And the same they are hypothesizing for social contact. And this is a very interesting thing, and we will go a little bit more in deep later on, because it can explain why at a certain point a lack of social contact lead to a lack also of looking for social contact, with some sort of vicious circle that is around, for example, loneliness and isolation. But let's go on a few experiments that they have tried to understand the effect of social isolation in humans. There are a lot of studies in animals, and we know that there are responses, there are physiological, spatial, and behavioral to bring back the system to the balanced state. There is very little in humans. As you can imagine, this is not something you can do every day. And they need ethical approval, so not all population can be targeted for social isolation. The first study that has been conducted with experimentally manipulating social isolation, it was done by Livia Tomova in 2000 and I think 19 or 20, so before COVID breakdown actually, so it was quite timely because then actually happened what we have for a few years. And what she did, she performed a within subject design in which participants were asked to come to the lab, and in a different condition, they undergo to different manipulations. So in the fasting condition, they were not allowed to eat. In the isolation condition, they were restrained from any social contact, while in the baseline condition, they were able to eat and to meet whoever they want. So the idea here was to understand, or research question was to understand, when you are deprived of a particular motivator, like for example, food or social contact, does the system create a sort of craving for the stimulus that you are missing? And are these craving comparables? So the idea was not to test whether food deprivation lead to hunger and looking for food, because we know this is what happened, but rather whether social isolation leads to a similar craving and looking for social contact as food deprivation. So after these three different conditions, she performed an fMRI experiment in which she behaviorally looked at a craving towards food or social images and how the brain reacted to it. So what she observed is that indeed social isolation lead to social craving over the time. So in this questionnaire, basically during the time, so 10 hours of social isolation, she observes that there is an increase in desire for social contact. And also there is a higher sensitivity with the behavioral task to social cue compared to food cue. And this is similar to what happened in food craving. So after 10 hours of fasting, you have an increase in the desire for food and a sensitivity for food picture compared to social picture. So indeed, 10 hours social isolation are able to induce this craving and this sense of I need to meet someone, and this preference or sensitivity for social stimuli. And what she also observed is that the midbrain area, that is an area in the brain that is processing, or is particularly related to social or to reward processing, was specifically sensitive to the deprived stimulus. So in case of food, it was sensitive or was more active during food picture presentation. And during social isolation or after social isolation, was more sensitive to picture of social stimuli. So say that, you say, well, that's not tremendously new. Let's say, I would imagine that if you don't eat, you are sensitive to food. And possibly if you don't see anyone, you're isolated, you are sensitive to social. But it was the first time that it was looked experimentally. So what we did, we tried to move behind the study and ask why this is the case. So what is happening during a social isolation that led us being more sensitive to other stimuli or social stimuli? How does our homeostatic system react to this deprived state? And is this reaction similar to what happened to fasting? So basically, we ask the question, we look specifically at physiological and subjective stress responses and affective state. So we want to see over the time what is changing and how is similar to another homeostatic state disbalance. So what we did in particular, so we somehow tried to replicate what Livia did, it a little bit more in a more thorough way, because in our case, and I didn't say before, participants were not always in a lab setting. And in this case, we create here in Vienna a room, an isolation room, that is actually the basement of the University of Vienna. So people were segregated there for 8 hours and for 3 days in 3 different times. And in each day, they went one of the 3 manipulations, either social isolation, fasting, or baseline. After the experiment, we also wanted to see whether we could validate what we saw in the laboratory into the field. And basically, we looked at the effect of social isolation in everyday life during lockdown due to COVID-19. And I will show the results of these two different studies. So the first study, this is basically how the day of participants went through. Basically, they arrived in the morning, they received very thorough instruction of what they had to do, because basically they were alone all day and they had to find a way to eat, find a way to call people and so on. So there was a clear instruction to them. And then from 11 onwards, they were put in the 3 different conditions. In the baseline conditions, as you can see, they were delivered of meals, that is this one, a different time point, and social interaction. So they had access to everything. And every second hours we took, or every hours we took several measures about subjective mood, stress, but also saliva cortisol and heart rate response. So they were monitored during the day what will happen to their body and to their psychological state. Here you can see we look at 30 participants. They were only female, and then I can also tell you why we select only female, so we can go a little bit more on this. So as I say before, they have scheduled conversation, and this conversation basically looked like they had access to a laptop in which they could Skype or make a Zoom call on everything. So they were deprived by their smartphone, but with this laptop that we gave to them, they could call relatives, friends, whoever they want, and talk to them for 30 minutes. And then they had several small meals plus a main meal during the day. And as I said, we collect several measures. During the social isolation condition, we left all the same, but we removed completely social contacts. So they did not have a chance to talk to other people for 8 hours, 10 hours actually. And during the fasting session, they did not receive any food. So basically they were exactly the same. Yes, that was really tough for them. Actually, we had a camera inside to see if any one of them was fainting during the day, because we could not go inside, of course. So yeah, it's a very complicated study, but it's amazing. I really love this study. This is really, yeah, we control everything. We could control everything we could control for, because we want really to be sure they were comparable, the conditions. So what are the results? Very interesting results. First of all, we saw that over the time, so it is more or less the color will be color coded for, will be the same throughout the presentation. So fasting in red, isolation in green, and blue is the baseline condition. As you can see over the time, participants, they report loneliness, increasing loneliness, and also the increased desire for social contact, but this is stronger for social isolation condition. So this is slightly different from what we saw before. It's because in the other condition, fasting and the baseline, they were done at home. So the environment was very different than the social isolation. Here in a very controlled environment, and definitely to be in a lab, in a basement, that's not the great place you want to be. So also in the other two conditions, you feel like, okay, that's enough probably. But still the increase on these two measures is higher for social isolation, during social isolation. What happened to fasting? Well, boom, the fasting is much, much steeper. So as you can see here, people get much more hungry, and the desire for food is much stronger when you don't receive food. So this is a very interesting part of it. So the timing of building up this aversive outcome that come from a disbalanced state is different, depending whether it's deprived of food and we are deprived of social contact. That makes totally sense. So if you don't see anyone for 10 hours, some of you maybe is even happy, especially the one after this week. Like, oh my God, I would like to stay 10 hours without talking to anyone. But for food, maybe after this week also food, I don't know how is the situation. But for food, definitely not eating for 10 hours, you build up a sense of hunger is much stronger. But what they have in common? Well, what we found very interesting, but first, the desire to avoid the current situation is equally high for social isolation and food deprivation compared to the baseline condition. So they found the situation aversive. And what is interesting for me is energetic arousal and fatigue. They are reported as being equally low energy and high fatigue for social isolation and food deprivation. So this is a very interesting finding, because if you can imagine that food deprivation naturally brings to a depletion of energy, because you are not bringing or putting in the organism any nutrient, so any energy intake, why social isolation is a depletion of energy. And we control for boredom. So you could say, well, maybe they are just bored during this day. Despite we control for it, still energy depletion seems to be one of the landmarks of being socially isolated, that is similar to fasting. We did not find any difference in cortisol, so in saliva cortisol. So what we saw is just a decrease over the day of salivary cortisol. This is a very, very common pattern that you see for cortisol response, with a peak here, not for during the fasting condition, because this is when you eat. So basically after you have lunch, your cortisol goes up. And as you may not know, cortisol is indicated as a stress response, stress marker. But stress is everything that is used to activate your body. If you need to eat, this is a stressor, and the cortisol goes up because it has to activate the body. And what happened during the day, if you don't have major stressor, especially of physical nature, cortisol goes down. This is also something interesting we found during COVID lockdown, because we measure hair cortisol before and after lockdown, and what we saw was actually a decrease in cortisol level. And one possible explanation is because people stayed at home all day. And this is such a lack of a stressor in terms of physical activation. So you don't have to go out and bring the children to the kindergarten and to school and run to the office, and then the bus is full of people. You just stay home. Maybe you have the children that scream around, but it's a different mobilization. And that's possible one of the reasons where the cortisol goes down. And this is what we observe here. So it's not the right market for us for detecting this energy depletion. Also, we did not really see changes in alpha amylase, or at least change during the three different conditions, and heart rate. Heart rate, again, you see that after around a certain point, you have a bump up, and this is probably because of the main meal. So when you have food in the body, you have to just digest it. What we observe, so then let's have a look on the field study. So we had this really big data set that we collect during lockdown. And if I have the time, I will present, but probably not. So what we thought at a certain point, it was, well, we have exactly the same measure that, or well, not exactly, but most of the same measure that we collected during the laboratory experiment in terms of mood and stress. And we have also same timing during the day, because it was an ecology momentary assessment study in which participants were given a mobile phone. Well, actually, we're not given a mobile phone. So they could download on their mobile phone an app, and this app was prompting them to answer a certain question on different time points. So basically, during lockdown, they could participate in the study and answer this question. Many different things, many different questions we delivered to them. But among them, we extract the same question that we were using in the lab experiment. And yeah, sorry, my back. And then we tried to recreate a within subject design in which we picked up participants that were reporting at least 1 day of social isolation, as defined as not seeing anyone during the day and not talking to anyone during the day for at least 8 hours, and compare these to days in which they did not report this social isolation. So from the 750 participants we collect the data, 87 only had this condition. So only 87 had at least 1 day of social isolation and 1 day of non-social isolation. So there are very few. Of course, they could pick up the phone and talk to someone. So we need someone that really were isolated, not talking to anyone. And then we look at the same parameter, subjective mood and energy and fatigue, that we look in the lab experiment. So what we observe is first that so each line is and each dot is a participant in the baseline and the social condition. So you remember there are within subject participants. So some, they were reporting an increase in loneliness, and other, the red one, is a decrease in loneliness. But most, on average, what we see is that during social isolation day, participants seems to feel more lonely compared to non-socially isolated day. So days in which they could talk to someone. Differently from the lab experiment, we didn't observe an increased desire for social contact, but rather a decreased desire for social contact during social isolation days. And this was particularly true for people with high sociability trait. So we measure different personality related characteristics. One of them was sociability. And what we observe is that the more sociable was the person, the less report a desire of meeting someone during social isolation. And also here we could discuss why it could be the case. And more interesting for us, or equally interesting for us, we could validate the finding in the lab experiment. So energetic arousal was reported in people with especially high sociability as being lower during social isolation day compared to baseline days. So this depletion of energy was replicated or was validated in the field, and also for people with they were living alone. So more sociable individuals and people living alone felt less energy when they were socially isolated, or when the day was a social isolation day. So what we could say for this study and how we could interpret the results. Well, first, across 2 different contexts, the lab experiment, the field study, we found a consistent effect of social isolation on energetic arousal. I mean, we could not probably say that social isolation has an effect on energetic arousal in the field, because there is no causal manipulation on that. But we are quite confident this is the case in the lab. And in the real life, this effect depends on sociability and living situation. We also observe that in the lab study, fasting and social isolation comparably led to lower energetic arousal, higher fatigue, and desire to avoid the present situation. So it seems that there is something in common between these 2 homeostatic states, if we can consider social needs as a part of an homeostatic system, with energetic, the energetic component being one of the key element of it. We also found a field study that social isolation was related to higher loneliness, but lower desire for social contact. So how we can interpret that? Well, we are trying to wrap our head around it because we don't know what is happening. But what is possible is energetic arousal is part of a social homeostatic response or a general homeostatic response. So it's possible that when an organism is depleted of an element, food, water, or social contact, if it doesn't have access to it immediately, then it goes on an energy saving mode. So basically, if I have access to it, then oh no, I need food. I run to the fridge, I open the food and I eat. But if I don't have access to it and I know it, maybe the best things to do is to just lower the activity and feel tired, because the organism cannot spend too much energy. And this is what we think is happening in social isolation. So social isolation also can make us over-predict energy demands, so leading to some sort of allostatic load. So we usually spend less energy when we are with other people because we are doing things together. And it's possible that knowing that you are alone and under social isolation, this leads to over-predict how much energy I should invest in the environment. Well, the other thing is that I'm not sure, probably I should stop here because it's already time. It's also very interesting that social isolation and fatigue, and loneliness have bidirectional link. And this is something that I think would be very, very important to look in the future. And maybe I will just go to the very last slide. Can I go out and do, I guess so, I tried, yes. Because I can go here and 2 minutes. So this is the very complex model that we saw before for social homeostasis, with the idea that if you basically move out of a range of your set point, and you cannot go back as usually you try to, the organism try to do, but if in case you are not allowed to do because you don't have access to the resources, so it's not possible, what is happening is that your set point change. This is what we saw before, and this phase maybe is marked by energy depletion. So basically you just use up your energy to try to bring up or let's say to go back to the homeostatic state that is not accessible because you don't have the resources to it, and this energy depletion change the set point, or is one of the elements, the marker of this change of the set point. And this could possibly explain why lonely people, as I said at the beginning, they don't have the energy to engage and to look for social contact and for new interaction. And with this, I have finished my presentation, and I would like to thank Anna Stijovic, because it was my former PhD student that did all this work, and many of other collaborators were involved, and thank you for your attention.
Yeah. Thank you for the great, very interesting talk. We still have plenty of time for questions. I'll switch to the microphone. One second. It's this one, right?
Yeah.
Right. I'm also monitoring chat in case we have any questions.
Sure.
And yeah, then I'm opening up the floor for questions. Sydney.
Thank you for the super interesting talk. I was wondering about the set point, but what do you think is it determined? Is it something about personality? Like I'm thinking of extroverts, introverts, or yeah, what?
Absolutely. I think we know very little. So definitely, I think personality is one of the factors that kicks in. So for example, we saw that more sociable person, they are the one that feel more the effect of social isolation in terms of loneliness. That loneliness can be somehow experienced as the negative affect that you feel after the system is deprived. So definitely is personality factor, is contextual factor, which kind of life you have. So also how was your previous interaction? So what would be very interesting, we are trying to understand is because we are very much focused on depletion of deprivation of something, but what happens when you have an overload of the system? You try also to go to the set point and how you do that. So this set point definitely is modulated by this factor. And we don't know much how mechanistically it's done. So we don't know anything. So it's a lot of research we need to do.
You said you had a reason for selecting female respondents.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, I did. There were two main reasons. The first reason is because cortisol analysis. I mean, the cortisol scientific community is quite strict in which gender you are looking at or sex you are looking at, because there are differences between men and women. And because of resources, we could not have double of the sample size. So it was a very, very taxing experiment because you need to stay there for 10 hours and then you need to come 3 times. This was the first reason, so to have homogeneity on this. And the second reason is because we wanted to do a second part or final part that it did not, at the end we did not do it, similar to the study of Olivia Tomova, to look at how they react in terms of craving and liking or hedonic response to social stimuli, but in this case in the form of touch. Because we have a series of experiments in which we look at response to touch and food intake. And we know that women, they are more, it's easy for them, it's the paradigm than in men. So that's the main reason. So we want to have an homogeneous response and having the gender or the sex that was easy to put under tactile simulation because they receive caresses and men, for some, is a bit awkward, especially because same gender and so it's not always accepted, socially accepted. That's the reason.
Question.
Yeah, I had a very basic question, but what did these people do 10 hours in this room?
Yeah, they
Got your phone?
No, they don't have a phone. Yeah, they cannot have it. So basically, we provide the room with a lot of, some activities. They could also take some activities. So if they like knitting, anything, they could do that. We avoid any material with social contact, social content. So, for example, they had only book on geography, history, or and basically that's what they were doing during the day. Reading, some of them, or many of them, they were students. They were bringing books to study, but the books were pre-selected with us. In the sense that they could not, I don't know, bring whatever is War and Peace or any like very, very social with a social contact. And they were spending, some they were drawing, doing puzzles.
Gustavo?
So I have one point and one question. The
Yes.
point is that I'm not sure if everyone has watched Minefield by Vsauce, but he makes a lot of episodes about neuroscience, psychology, really interesting stuff. On one episode, he isolates himself for 3 days, so not exactly 10 hours, and he goes a little bit insane. But for the first moments, he's a very extroverted individual.
Extroverted, okay.
Yeah, so he speaks a lot, and one thing that he does as a mechanism, maybe to try to stimulate himself, is to talk, almost like simulating this social interaction that he's not getting. I wonder also if some of these people might try to do something similar. But the other question is, by the way, I like the way that you talked about how the homeostasis, the parameters can change depending on how long they've been. So do you think that this changes of loneliness and energetic arousal, will they continue to happen over days, or will they eventually just flat?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that. I would think that at a certain point we probably flatten. If I have in mind what happened to food consumption, I think that the set point changed. At a certain point, you just always need a bit of. I would imagine. I mean, I don't know much about the set point of food consumption, but I think at a certain point we flatten out. That's also one of the possible explanation why we saw in a social isolation study in the field, why there was a reduced desire for social contact. Because what we could be one possible explanation is because these people are people that they are in a lockdown and they have experienced a major burden on social contact. So it's also possible that is a shift in the set point. So that despite they feel loneliness, still they have a reduction of the desire to contact other people because of the experience they had during this lockdown. How stable they are, how quickly they change, and they go back, and when they chronicize, we don't know. We don't know anything about it. So this is super interesting to investigate.
Christiana and then Bert.
I have two questions about the field study. First of all, was COVID a happy coincidence for this study?
It was really a happy coincidence.
Okay. And if not for COVID, how would the field study go about it?
I will not exist probably. No, really. I mean, it was something like, oh, it's horrible, and then, oh my God, this is the best experiment on earth. Really, I mean, it sounds very cynical. It was very taxing, and I'm Italian. In Italy, it was horrible to see what was happening, as in many other countries. But in this madness, you could say this is something that hopefully will not repeat. So it's just one life chance to have people that are isolated without their will. So we thought this is really, we need to do something because it's such a special moment. Of course, it's not the same condition because they can always take a phone and call people, and definitely it's not the same condition. But the lack of physical contact was one of the main things that was spread, especially for who were living alone. And we target people that were younger, so it's higher probably they were the students somewhere strained, I don't know, in some small apartment somewhere in Europe. It was very high. So it was really a happy coincidence. And I don't think it would have been a field. I cannot imagine a field study of social isolation. Because, I mean, maybe what you can do is to tell them to self-isolate. But yeah, exactly. This is my thing. Like, I'm sure I can do that.
Bert.
Thanks, Giorgia. It's great to have you in the network, and it's great to hear you talk about this fascinating work. We've been talking about young people in politics for the past week. Can you speculate a little bit what you think are sort of the social political consequences of this sort of social isolation and loneliness, maybe?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, the first thing that is not totally, it's not related to the consequence is targeting the younger. And what we know is that there has been done a study by Livia also in adolescents on the social isolation, and basically she saw that even 4 hours of social isolation has an impact on their psychological and stress response and craving attitude. So to say that it seems even faster, yeah. And we want to look at this as well. What are the consequences? That's a very, very interesting question. I think my feeling now is that we live in a society in which we are overstimulated rather than the opposite. So, and maybe this overstimulation lead to forced isolation. So that people, because they want to withdraw from all this social contact, that isolate even more. Because we are also in a pandemic, or at least in the period with loneliness is very high. And this, I would imagine, that has societal consequence, because this overstimulation is you just need to withdraw from something, and then you don't engage in other type or so interaction. Yeah, it's something I'm trying to wrap my head around. What is the consequence of this? So what I can tell and what I feel very comfortable to say is that it's a system that is in place and is evolutionarily relevant. So we have it because without this, we do not survive. And if this system is overloaded, as if, for example, we are overloaded by food, we have severe health consequences. Yeah. That this is something we should start to think seriously. So that's my message. I would like to tell you more. Do you think any consequence of this, or do you have something that you can your mind just.
Well, so Delaney Peterson, who is in Amsterdam, one of the PhD students of our lab, has been connecting loneliness with far-right voting. So she finds pretty consistent now evidence for positive, more lonely, more far-right voting. I think turnout, looking at Sylvia, right? So, you know, maybe this dysregulation shutting off from society.
That's very interesting.
So maybe just total also, so that's social disconnection from society.
So yeah, social disconnection. I mean, everything that is also related to social relationship and social relationship of also even different people, different culture, or diversity in general is very energy demanding because, and if you do not have the energy to go into this, it's much easier for you to just say what is that predictable. It is your environment, your nation, your neighbor, and whatever you know how it works. And that could be maybe the consequence of it. So you don't have the energy to accommodate what is different because of the overall.
The question, and then Nikita.
I was just curious about the measurement of the desire for social contact in the field study. Was it more about physical contact or general? Because we were avoiding people, right, for the reasons we didn't want to get the virus.
Yeah, that's. I think the desire was general desire to meet people, and this is also one of the other possible explanation. Actually, the first one that we thought about is that during COVID, especially the highly social people, they are maybe the ones that are even more, usually there is some sort of relationship between sociality and empathy, extroversion. So if there are people that are more caring for the other, they are also the ones that reinforce this behavior even more to say, well, I feel lonely, but I don't want to see anyone because it's dangerous for me and for my peer. So that could be absolutely one of the explanation of the findings. We did not connect to fear, or because we have measured like fear of COVID-19. There are several things we could look at when these people that they desire less social contact are also the one that they report a stronger fear of COVID-19. That could be an easy way to look at it.
Nikita.
So you mentioned it was very hard to find days when people had no social contact at all. Do you consider online interactions with people as social contact?
Yes.
So maybe in that sense, the social desirability aspect, since it was so hard to find those days, maybe the reason it decreased on those days because people sort of voluntarily, it was days that they chose not to interact.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's sort of, which is the difference with the lab study where they didn't have a choice versus having a choice.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. So that's why I say we cannot really say the effect of social isolation on, because maybe it's the fact that you don't want to see anyone, that you just don't see anyone. Because for them, it was very easy to take a phone and call someone. Absolutely. But still energy goes down.
That's true.
Or goes down. Maybe there was not enough energy from start with, and then they did not get into anything. Yeah.
So I think we've had a question in the chat.
Yeah, we usually take the live question first. So, but yeah, since we're at it, I'm just going to read out this question. Then it's a question from Honorata. She says, "Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering if this thermostat could also work both ways. So if people spend a whole day in the basement with other people, would the craving for social isolation increase?"
Yes, absolutely. I think it would be a brilliant next follow-up experiment. So have like a big brother and see when you spend 8 hours, 10 hours with other people, what happened to the system. Absolutely. I think that would be, yeah.
Yeah, my question is very much related to the last two. And it's basically whether you expect that people get the same benefits from offline as online interaction.
No, I do not expect the same.
So did you look at it in the field experiment?
So I did not look at this one. This is something that we can try to look at. I'm not sure I have enough variability in the data because we really found very, very few people that. But we could try to extrapolate the contact day, the baseline day, whether they have physical contact or only messages. It's something we can look at. what I know is that the study that was mentioned with adolescents, they did the same isolation for 4 hours, and in one group, the isolation during the isolation, they could exchange messages with friends. So it was operationalized in a different way. It was no social contact in a physical way, but they could use smartphone for getting social media. And they saw that partially this contact was recovering the effect of the isolation on craving, but not totally. So that was also very interesting. And that speaks, so this social contact, yeah, I don't know, then it goes into the, don't use the smartphone, things like that. Sorry, that's like the old parents rant about don't use social contact. But it's quite interesting to see that it could not be completely recovered by using a phone. It's very interesting study.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
It's a very short one.
Yeah.
Because energy levels dropped when people didn't have social contact. Did they eat more? Did you see them?
No, that's also something we want to look at. So there is my next study that if Anna is still up to do this crazy social isolation people, is to look whether appetitive rewards can compensate that. So the idea is exactly this. So you are in a aversive state. The reward that you need, social contact is not immediately available. Can you use other high appetitive pleasure reward to compensate that? I would imagine yes. In that case, they were not. I mean, because they had pasta. Pasta is a pretty boring food, so I don't think that they ate really more. We didn't look at that. But I would imagine they will do that. But what also I expect is that the effect of this short-term relief will not last long. So basically, if you don't go to to target the stimulus that is missing, that you are deprived for, then you go in a loop of, again, aversive state, looking for appetitive rewards, brief relief, but then I miss this. This is what we want to look now. I mean, we need a long day.
Okay, and I think I'm going to take the last question from the chat. Delaney says, loneliness does not always equate to social isolation. You can feel lonely while having plenty of social contacts. Can you speak to how this distinction might be relevant to your findings?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think this is related to the other aspect that we did not investigate here, that is the quality of social contact. So in the model, they put quantity, but also quality of social contact. So how to measure that? I mean, this is also another factor in the equation. But definitely, it's also possible that you set point. I mean, definitely is a mix of how many people you need to see, but also what is the relationship, the quality of the interaction with these people. And it is totally possible that when the quality goes down, you have this loneliness that is, again, this negative affective state driven by the homeostatic system that is not balanced anymore, but still you are maybe surrounded by people. Yeah, that's definitely a very good point.
All right, I think with that, it's wrap. Thank you.
Thank you.